would you like to go next?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tom. And thank you, Laura, for the invitation. It's really a privilege to be able to speak about this topic to all of you. My name is Katie Rigg, and I'm Head of Safeguarding and Student Wellbeing at the Council of International Schools, which is supporting the research that Laura was talking about. For those of you who don't know CIS, it's a membership network, an organization. We have 1,250 school and university members in over 120 different countries. So we're completely global. And we provide a range of services, including accreditation for schools. My background is in law. I was a child protection lawyer for many years, working with schools and international schools. And I joined CIS 3 years ago. So I've been supporting our school and our higher education communities. I went to an international school myself as well. And although I'd never heard of the term third culture kid while I was at school, when I did hear about it many years later, it sort of was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because it articulated so many of the things that I'd been feeling in my own school and in my own sort of childhood. And so it's a really sort of important subject, and one that I'm very passionate about, and one that we spend a lot of time talking about at CIS, particularly through the lens of well-being. So I'm just going to take 10 minutes to talk to you a bit about some of the pressures that we're seeing students face, TCKs face, as they transition from high school to higher education, usually moving again to another country to go to university. And I will take you through a practical activity towards the end around sort of managing pressures. So hopefully you can all see that. So I'll talk first of all about some emerging themes from some research that we've been carrying out at CIS, and then I'll move on to the practical activity. So the themes that I'm going to talk about are drawn from two sort of activities that we did. The first one is a survey which we did last year, which was to our counsellors, school counsellors. So 134 counsellors answered the survey based in 52 different countries. And the survey was really asking them what they were seeing in terms of the impact of the pandemic on their students' well-being, and particularly looking at their graduating students as they were transitioning to higher education. And then this year we have conducted a series of focus groups with students. We have talked to students from 11 different schools and universities. You can see the geographic spread there on the slide, and that's across 10 different countries. And those were carried out by the counsellors within the institutions, and they sort of sat down with the students and really talk to them about what pressures the high school students were seeing as they were preparing to transition to higher education. And then for the university students, it was looking back on their transition and sort of reflecting on it in terms of what had helped them and what support they think actually they would have liked that they might not have received, both from the school and the university side. So one of the themes that came out of those discussions was around discrimination and personal safety. So the students were saying that they were, the high school students were saying that they were worried about discrimination in the country that they were going to. Particular references were made to the US and the UK, and to Brexit and Black Lives Matter, and stuff that the students were seeing in the media. And this is just a quote from one student who said, "Worrying about discrimination has influenced my decision. I don't want to study somewhere where I could be victimized or harassed." Other students talked about how they felt safe in the country that they were currently in, and then they would have to learn how to be safe in the country that they were going to. And there were also discussions around sort of worries around sexual violence. So a lot of the students had seen stuff in the media again around sexual harassment on university campuses, and so that was a feature of those discussions. Another theme was around resilience of international school students and TCKs. So one student said, I do feel that being an international student, you have a unique starting point. You may be better adapted to survive. So that was a university student who'd come from an international school. And there were a number of comments like that, which talked about how some of the students had already undergone a number of transitions. And so they'd learned sort of how to manage the pressures in that transition. And so they felt better able to manage those as they went into university. The flip side of that was there were a number of students, university students, TCKs, who said that actually they had found it really difficult because they were again moving away from their family and their support network, and they found it difficult to find belonging and community in their university. And one of the things that came out strongly from that was the residence programs that a lot of universities run, and how actually they were saying it was only really in our residency that we found community and we found a sense of belonging. There were a lot of discussions around identity and intersecting identity factors. There were discussions around race, gender, socioeconomic background, with one student, questioning, how's it going to be for me at university? Is my race going to define me differently in a new place? And for TCKs, well, for everyone, we all have lots of facets to our identity, but for TCKs, sometimes it can be particularly complex as they're transitioning to different environments and sort of trying to form their own identity within that. And one of the recommendations from the students, which came out from a number of institutions, was that they wanted their schools to start talking to them about these issues earlier on and to help them to navigate some of those transitions, some of those different factors of their identity, because they felt that a lot of the issues around race and gender, for example, weren't talked about enough and were considered taboo in some of their schools, and that sort of didn't help them as they thought about how that would then change as they transitioned to university. Narrow definition of success was something that came out really strongly, much stronger than I had anticipated. And this is just one quote, but it represents a lot of the different quotes that came out of it, from a student who said, there's this internal pressure. There are things and courses I'd love to do, but it's too risky. It's better to not choose something risky. And there were lots of similar quotes from students saying they would have liked to do something else, or maybe not go to university, but actually they felt that given the climate and the pressures that they felt were put on them, or that they put on themselves, they'd chosen sort of a narrower course. And then cultural preparedness came out a lot. So this is a quote saying, I constantly had to tell people about my religion because they always assumed the wrong thing. There were lots of TCKs at university who talked about the different sort of the change in diet, mannerisms being different, and then also how they maybe had lots of exposure to different cultures through their international school upbringing, but what they some of them hadn't had exposure to was such a range of socioeconomic backgrounds amongst students, and they found that actually quite difficult, whereas a lot of the cultural stuff they found easier to manage because they had gone through a number of transitions already. And then coming out of the survey and the focus groups, and then some other research that's been conducted, is really the importance of schools cultivating skills such as life skills, such as time and routine management, but also social emotional learning from an early stage. And the research on the impact of social emotional learning is really strong, and Castle is a fantastic place to go if you're interested in learning about that. Students talked about the importance of talking about cultural and social changes. There's a lot of discussion around how guidance counsellors in schools can encourage their students to ask universities in advance about what support they will provide once they arrive. So what does their international student orientation look like? Is it integrated with the other programs? Do they have what opportunities do they have to build belonging and community, whether that's in the academic community or peer support networks, and to really get a sense of that before students choose sort of which university they want to go to. And then, this came out of a recent study around the importance of teaching students to view the support services as proactive skill building, but also to encourage the students to reach out to the university at an early stage if they have specific needs, and to talk about those so that those needs can be met throughout their university experience. And then finally, which really links to what you were talking about, Laura, this is from a recent study, which I can sort of link you up with because it hasn't been published yet, but and they talk about how they were looking at international students who had joined university remotely, and the importance of social media for some of those students in like increasing their sense of belonging. So finding other students at the university who studied like similar courses because they weren't actually there in person, how that took on like a really important element of their transition experience. The title of the session was Managing Pressures. So in terms of just one activity that you can do with students, and I've done this with a lot of students, and it's always generates really interesting discussion. It's from Dr. Bill Mitchell, who is a psychologist from London, and he talks about what makes up our well-being, and for him it's really sort of three elements. It's the way we see things and healthy choices. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but he talks much more eloquently about it than I do anyway, so if you're ever interested, let me know and I can let you know when he's speaking. But then he also talks about this importance of protecting our physiology. And that's really to do with lots of things that I don't understand because I'm not a scientist, but it's to do with like the chemical regulation in our body, neurotransmitters, and all of these things impact on our mood. And he breaks it down into these sort of 7 categories and does this activity with students where he asks them to rate where they are on protecting their own physiology. And so if you can do it yourself now if you like. So on exercise, if you exercise almost every day for, say, minimum 20 minutes, half an hour, and that can include a quick walk, then you can give yourself +2. If it's more like once a week, twice a week, +1. And if it's drifted away, then -1. Relaxation is like anything that lets your mind switch off. So it's yoga, reading a book, listening to music, cooking. Again, if you do that almost every day, +2. Once or twice a week, +1, and less than that, -1. Sleep. So if you sleep between sort of more than 7 hours a night on a consistent basis, +2. Between 6 and 7, +1, and less than 6 is -1. Diet, he talks about just making sure that you don't have things which will destabilize your blood sugar levels. So having more protein-based things, not carbohydrates, not snacks. And if you feel that you do really well at that, you always eat healthily and you don't snack on sugary things, then +2. And, if you're not as great, +1. If you think you're not good at all, then -1. Alcohol doesn't have any positives, interestingly, but I think his rating is if you have more than 2 bottles of wine a week, -1, and more than 3 bottles of wine a week, it's -2. Social, if you have times with friends, laughter, if you do that once or twice a week, then it's +2. And if you do it once or twice a month, it's +1. And then relationships is time with your partner, really. So time where you are like switching off and spending time together, not talking about chores, and that can be your partner or your family. And again, if you do that once or twice a week, it's +1. And a bit less is +2, and a bit less is +1. So you can rate yourself and then ask students to sort of see how they're doing and do it at different times of the year. And his whole sort of thing is that actually the better that you are at this, the better you will be at managing change in your life. And transitions is a really massive change. And so whether that's transitions into higher education or transitions between schools, then this is going to be something that you can control and that you can sort of work on throughout. And then I will share these slides with you afterwards, Laura, but these are just some of the key resources that might be helpful in this area. And then if any of you want any further information or have any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks very much.